Welcome to the Picture This Photography podcast, where we cover all sorts of topics, the history, the debates, and the interesting stories about photography and much more. And today we're talking about if DJI and China are spying on the US. Now, Tony, you're taking the lead on this one, but I'm going to just jump in and say probably yes, because everyone is spying on everyone to a point where it's not even a relevant question anymore.
That very well might be our conclusion, but we're going to look at the real facts. And we're going to look at things like why the US Army banned the use of DJI drones.
You cannot use a DJI drone in the Army anymore?
No, and they present a pretty good and pretty compelling case that they really might be involved in spying by the Chinese government. But I'm going to really dig into it and figure out whether it's okay to use these things, whether they're safe, or whether you're colluding in some sort of cyber crime.
But DJI has some compelling arguments too. I have heard their side of the story.
Yes, this is not a one-sided argument at all.
It's not one-sided. It's not easy, but we're going to dig into it. But first, we want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace, for making this podcast possible. Whether you need a domain website or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. They have beautiful award-winning designer templates, award-winning 24/7 customer support, and if you can drag and drop, you can make a Squarespace website. To get your free trial today, go to squarespace.com/Tony and enter the offer code portfolio to get 10% off your first purchase. Thanks, Squarespace.
Thanks, Squarespace. And first, let's say that drones are immensely useful tools. They're fun, but a lot of people in military positions are also drone enthusiasts. And once they figure out how easy it is to get one up in the air and see their surroundings, like just imagine how useful that would be for scoping out land that you're about to invade, or looking at formations of troops, or even if you're just in construction, like maybe you're building a fort or something, you want to just make sure that the construction is going okay and check the progress. These are immensely useful tools. So lots of people in the military, without some big coordinated effort, will often just grab their home drone and pop it up in the air.
Yeah, it makes sense. They're affordable, they're easy to use. So It seems like a logical step for drones.
And as a result, the military often needs to kind of assess these consumer level tools, which can sneak their way into actual military actions. And so what happened, in the US Navy issued a memo about it, and then the US Army just simply banned them. And then US Immigration had a memo that leaked, and it went into a great deal of detail about why they were very, very highly concerned that DJI, the Chinese company, was leaking people's private data, for example, the photos that they take with their drones, to the Chinese government. So these could be photos of secret military installations. They could be photos of critical infrastructure, like the power sources or whatever provides your clean water. And that could be immensely useful to something like the Chinese government, because governments are, well, they're always planning various stages of attacks that will probably never happen. Like the US government, just for example, has a long list of exactly what we'll do if we have to attack the Chinese.
Yeah, this isn't just a China thing. This is what governments do.
Governments in general.
You're always strategizing and planning and looking for ways to have a leg up over another country.
Yeah, and you're trying to collect intelligence. And yeah, we have satellites, but satellites aren't passing over spaces all the time. The resolution is kind of low, and drones provide these like super high resolution, fairly frequently updated imagery of places all over the world. Here are some quotes from that immigration report. The Chinese government is using DJI UAS, that's drones, as an inexpensive, hard-to-trace method to collect U.S. critical assets. That's like a powerful statement, right?
Yeah, how can they say something so definitive? What was the proof?
They had a source.
Who?
They just had a source. And I will say that me saying that they have a source isn't to discredit them, because often law enforcement and military will use a source. It could be a confidential informant, and that source has great, solid information. They might be an employee of DJI who is receiving these memos and actually working on the effort, and they can be 100% confident in that source's data. Or the source could be a crackpot who's making some stuff up. but they often can't reveal the details of
No, they have
the
to
source.
protect the source.
Yeah, exactly. So as a result, you do not get to assess that source's credibility. So when I say they have a source, I have no idea how credible they are or not.
Twist.
Nobody really does. Another quote from them: DJI automatically uploads this information into cloud storage systems located in Taiwan, China, and Hong Kong, to which the Chinese government most likely has access.
Which information? Actual video footage or just coordinates, like GPS coordinates? What?
That is a great question that we will get to in just one second. I actually did some research here.
Okay. Because some information would not be very troubling. Any information you put online becomes public information, potentially.
Right.
So,
Edward Snowden taught us this, right?
Yeah.
DJI, this is another quote, DJI aggressively dropped its prices by as much as 70% in less than a year, effectively forcing its main competitors out of the market.
What does that have to do with spying? I mean, that's monopolistic, but it's not.
This is also a great question. They're accusing DJI of what's called dumping, and it's generally an illegal act for businesses. You can't sell stuff under market price with the purpose of killing your competitors. But it's also a pretty common tactic.
I mean, but Amazon exists and they do that all of the time.
It sure seems like Amazon has done this, right? And a lot of companies will give stuff away for free.
Oh, I have to say, like, allegedly.
Microsoft allegedly did that for a long time too. They would just decide to give stuff away for free up until the point when they lost all their competitors, and then they would start charging for it. This is a business tactic. This is what you would do if you wanted to dominate an industry, which businesses want to do. But it's also what you would do if you wanted to be able to do as much spying as possible.
Yeah, just, hey, everyone get one. Here you go, one for you, fly it over wherever.
Yeah, and so these quotes to me, these are quotes from the U.S. immigration on reasons that they think DJI is colluding with China to spy on the U.S.
But isn't there plausible deniability for all of these? I mean, this is a common strategy for any business, no matter what they're selling, to undercut their competition, to run them out of business. And also collecting data on customers. I mean, that happens on Facebook. That happens everywhere. They want to know who you are, where you're flying, what you're doing to market to you more effectively. I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just saying so far it seems to me it could go either way.
Yeah, and the report said that they had high confidence in their source. And that's all we have to go on. We have to trust the guy who has high confidence, and we have to trust his source, but we don't have the information to assess that. Here's another really interesting quote. DJI's criteria for selecting accounts to target appears to focus on the account holder's ability to disrupt critical infrastructure.
What does that mean?
DJI, after they made little consumer toys, they moved into more professional markets, and they specifically started making professional drones that would do things like monitor power lines. Because, if those big power lines that go through the countryside and carry like lots of wattages, they have to be inspected on a regular basis. And up until recently, you would put up a full-sized helicopter with a couple of dudes in there, and they would just fly alongside it with some binoculars and inspect it. And that was very expensive and actually really dangerous.
Can I take the counterpoint again?
Yeah.
They're also going after the film industry, which also would have to hire helicopters for shots, and that's very expensive.
What if the Chinese government wants to spoil the next Avengers movie?
They're just writing spoilers.
Yeah.
Again, just playing the other side here. I mean, those industries previously had very expensive ways to monitor power lines, bridges, all sorts of infrastructure. So it makes sense that they would move into that market. It also means that they could be doing some spying, but
Well, if you're concerned that DJI is colluding with China, and then you see DJI suddenly targeting all the organizations that are managing the drinking water for the major cities in the U.S., that sounds really scary, right? It's not proof of anything, but it sounds scary. It feels scary.
But for me, what is the real issue here? Is our government threatened that new technology is giving other governments the potential to be dangerous, and they want to shut it down before it could happen, or do they actually have a source?
Good question. I have no idea whether they have a source, but I will say from my experience in security that they're going to be worried about potential sources of risk. When you assess risk, you don't necessarily have to talk in certainties. You can just say, hey, there's a 2% chance that this information could be misused by an enemy government, but that could lead to them having more intelligence about how our clean drinking water is supplied, notifying them of a vulnerability that could allow them to poison the entire East Coast.
And also,
so that it might be a small chance, but the impact would be huge, and thus it's a risk that you need to take action on.
But don't people already do that by taking over computers at these facilities? I mean, you have hackers just completely shutting down public transportation and hospitals by taking over their computers and shutting down their systems.
This is definitely one of the bigger messages that I want to get across on this podcast. I cannot say that DJI is innocent or guilty. I don't think anybody can at this point. But it almost doesn't matter because this risk is so severe everywhere. So you brought this point up before. All these actions could be the work of DJI spying, but they could also be the work of DJI just being a business.
Or DJI could not even know how their information is being used.
That is an excellent point. Here's what DJI had to say about it. They said, among other things, the allegations in the bulletin are so profoundly wrong as a factual matter that the U.S. immigration should consider withdrawing the memo.
If they're completely innocent, this is not their intention at all, they're not working with their government, this is a huge accusation to make against the business.
Yeah, it would be totally unfair and really damaging to the business, especially since DJI is trying to move into like commercial and military, and it completely undermines that part of the business. And that's unfair to have somebody saying potentially incorrect things that have a massive impact on the business. Totally unfair. But let me also take the counterpoint that this coming from DJI's, like probably their PR team, I totally believe the PR guy here is telling the best truth that they know.
Why?
Well, because if in this scenario where
PR
DJI...
people?
Yeah, well, if DJI is funneling information to the Chinese government, do you think the PR person is CC'd on that memo? No.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That'd be weird if they were like, hey, buddy, spin this one. You're like, okay.
No, there's no way that they would be aware of it. So even if that was happening, the note from the DJI PR person would be exactly the same. So this doesn't really prove anything except that they don't officially condone it.
Yeah, they wouldn't want to know about it, so...
They also said DJI does not access its customers' flight logs, photos, or videos unless customers actively upload and share them with us. And this is a big statement. And just this past week, DJI released what they called an independent audit from a security company that reinforced this same thing, that by default, your photos and your flight logs are not uploaded to DJI.
So they're telling the truth about that. They don't get that information.
Yes, though I'll say their independent report was sponsored by them, which makes it not that independent. But
What?
I went and checked it myself, did some testing, looked at the network traffic and stuff, and I will validate it that on my version of DJI Go 4 with the drone that I tested, it didn't upload anything by default. I did have the option to go in, and there's kind of a hidden menu, and you can go into your DJI Go app and hit flight logs, and then you can synchronize them with the cloud. And that will upload your flight logs, the path of your drone, as well as photos. But it doesn't seem to upload videos. And the photos are actually like smaller thumbnail versions, which if you were spying, you would definitely want as much resolution as possible. So I think the fact that they've hidden it rather than making this the default or even making it a prominent option, the fact that it's kind of hard to find in the user interface is not the act of somebody who was deliberately trying to gather data for the purposes of spying?
Yeah, from what I've seen, people that are deliberately gathering data are not even secretive about it. When everything went on with Facebook, it was like everyone knew they were doing it for a long time.
Cambridge Analytica was deliberately gathering data on Facebook, and they made like cool little quizzes that people would take.
Yes.
And
aside from being annoying, I'd always think, why are you telling us like where you were born and your mom's maiden name and every security question. Please stop.
Those are the act of somebody who wants to gather data, and DJI burying this non-default feature in the user interface in a way that's hard to access is definitely not the behavior of somebody who's trying deliberately to gather data.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that's their goal. I totally believe DJI that they are not deliberately sharing information with the Chinese government.
So what's the deal? What's your theory?
One second, I want to read another quote.
Okay.
From DJI. At the same time, they said, DJI's new local data mode stops all internet traffic to and from the DJI Pilot flight control app to provide enhanced data privacy. This almost seems bogus. They put this local data mode app tool in their app and then widely publicized it, except they didn't. They put it in the DJI Pilot app, which almost nobody uses. Everybody uses the DJI Go app, and in fact, the DJI Pilot app is not even available for the iPhone. So you have to be using one of their specialized controllers or an Android tablet or something. So they specifically chose not to move this over to the DJI Go app, which everybody uses. So it almost seems like a distraction.
Like they are promising us more security, but it's not actually being implemented in a way that they expect people to use.
Yeah, and so when I found this out, I was like, whoa, this is actually suspicious again. And now I'm back the other way.
Dang, you're all over the place.
I know. Well, it's really hard to try to figure out what's happening when you're dealing with somebody who might potentially be misleading you. Because if they were doing it, they would be trying to mislead you. But if they weren't doing it, you could still, okay. So they definitely wanted good PR on this local data mode and didn't implement it in a broad way. But I actually agree with their choice not to implement it in a broad way, because local data mode prevents the controller from sending information to the cloud. But that prevents the app from determining whether you're in a safe zone to fly.
Oh, so that would make their product a bigger liability. They could potentially make people flying illegally, which would reflect poorly on the whole brand.
Yeah, so if you fire up your Phantom, one of the first things it's going to do is contact the internet and say, hey, is it okay to fly here? Is there a temporary flight restriction around a game, or are you right next to an airport where you might crash into an airplane and hurt people? And if it decides that it is, then it won't fly. And of course, if you turn off any sort of internet communications, then you can't do that, and so it's a potential risk. So I am actually glad that they're sending that data up.
You're back the other way.
So the question becomes, does DJI even have spy-worthy data? Do they have data that the Chinese government could find useful if they're not gathering pictures and flight logs by default? And most people are not sending that in. What could they even want? Well,
yeah, what's worst case scenario here?
Well, when you do fire up your drone, it's sending a unique identifier, something that identifies you. So they could tie that, they know your email address or whatever email address you gave them. It's not necessarily yours, but it's probably your real email address. And they know you have a drone and that you're flying it in this area on this particular date. Now, my theory, in one way it could be useful is if you were an agent, you could say, hey, I want to check out this military installation that I know is going up, but I want to see some photos of it. You could then search through their logs and say, oh, this guy, Tony at Northrup.org has been flying his drone in the area. Now I'm going to target that individual and try to pull the files from his smartphone or from his computer. And once you decide on somebody to target, it can be a pretty straightforward thing. You can send them some phishing stuff and hack into their computer and then potentially get it. But I don't see that there's going to be a lot of useful imagery that they could just immediately search, because I don't think most people send off their flight logs. But I do send off my flight logs with those thumbnail pictures.
Why are you telling?
Because nobody cares about seeing the sunset in Waterford, Connecticut. That's not, I don't think even the Chinese government cares about that.
They could spy on our neighbors' chickens, Tony. Be smart.
Okay, so DJI does have spy-worthy data, but it's probably not as valuable as I imagined when I started this story. I really thought all my photos and videos were going into the cloud and that they could just be universally indexed by location and somebody who hacked into the system could look anything up. That's not the case. The data is actually really, really sparse. They have thumbnails of images of people who decide to synchronize their logs, which is probably almost nobody.
Yeah.
We should take a little break because there's more to this.
What? Tease me. Tell me something.
It gets even scarier. You can't trust Anybody, even if I decide to completely absolve DJI, which I feel pretty good about, it's still really, really bad.
Okay.
Who makes all this possible, Chelsea?
This terrifying podcast is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, makes your next move with Squarespace. We both have Squarespace portfolios for
awesome.
our photography. I love it because I can just drag and drop. I was a little lazy. I didn't finish one of my last portfolios before Squarespace. So it's simple, it's well designed, it looks good. You can put your clients' photos on there and make it password protected. You can sell things in the store. We've sold prints that way. It's so easy to use and it looks great. So you should try it. You can get a 14-day free trial today if you go to squarespace.com/Tony and use the coupon code portfolio to get 10% off.
I actually used that link and coupon code to set up my own aerial photography website.
Oh yeah, you made a whole separate one. You have 2 Squarespace websites.
Yep, and I actually just pay for the second one because it's totally worth it.
Yeah, I like
Anyway,
them.
if you want to show off like your aerial photos and videos, maybe for a business, because you got your Part 107 or something, Squarespace is a great way to do it. They make everything look good. Okay, so here's the question. Does DJI need to cooperate in some kind of Chinese spying? Because the accusations made it sound like DJI was specifically funneling information to China. And they could be doing that.
Would they even have a choice? It's not like the government would be like, "Hey, you guys want to like cooperate?"
And that's a good question because in the US, is Facebook spying with the US government? Well,
they have everybody's information.
they have everybody's information, and if there's a subpoena, the Department of Justice or other legal departments could just pull somebody's stuff. They can subpoena Facebook for private records and stuff, and that happens all the time. So that's the US government pulling information from private corporations. The same thing could definitely happen in China. But we don't need to know, we don't know whether that is happening or how much it's happening. But I want to make the point that China, like all big governments, has some of the world's most powerful hackers at their disposal.
Oh, government hackers freak me out.
Oh,
They
it's
do
next
incredible
level
things.
stuff.
Yeah.
If they want your data, they get your data.
No.
And that's all it comes down to.
They shut down nuclear reactors and missile launches and
Yeah,
amazing.
Sometimes it's for good and sometimes it's for bad and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle, right? Here's a headline from the Register. Drone maker DJI left its private SSL and firmware keys open to the world on GitHub for years. This happened. Here's the full story. After all these security concerns with DJI opened up what's called a bug bounty, where they would pay anybody who found like security vulnerabilities in their code, they'd give them a bunch of money, up to $30,000.
Oh.
And so what this does is it motivates bored hackers to go through and give them free security audits. And if they find something, they whisper it to DJI. DJI fixes it. It doesn't become public. And they get paid and DJI gets more secure. So it's a common practice and it is a good way to tighten up your code. This one guy had a conflict with DJI. He didn't like the contract that they gave him. They were going to pay him $30,000, but it seemed like he had to hush up and be quiet about the attack or the vulnerability. So he passed on it and instead just made the story public. But
That's kind of rude.
for years, they left their password on a public website. And he was able to use that password to just see people's flight logs and images and stuff. All the stuff that I was talking about, it was literally public the whole time.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So were they funneling that data to the Chinese government? I think, does it even matter? Like they gave it to the whole world to see. Anybody who wanted to see it just needed to poke around. And the only reason it became public is because this one guy got irritated with their contract. But you think this was the first guy to find that?
Do you think like so many people found that and then they all talked about it? They're like, this is real dumb, right?
And that's how hackers work. If a hacker finds a way in, they don't tell people about it. They camp out. They put their private code in there. They use your computers for whatever they want. They monitor you for secrets. And they do their best to cover their tracks so that you will never know about it. Just about everybody's been hacked in some way. You just don't find out about it. There are people out there who brag about never being hacked, and they just don't know. So it's almost a moot point, right?
We actually have a whole podcast about getting hacked and getting a bunch of our photography gear stolen.
Yeah.
semi-hacked. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you should check that one out.
Yeah, check out our earlier podcasts. They're awesome, and not many people have listened to them.
Yeah.
So the question doesn't become, is DJI funneling data to China? It's really just, does China want the data, and would they steal it?
Why wouldn't they want it if it was available and it could benefit them? Who wouldn't take it?
Yeah, and there are lots of reasons either the Chinese government or private enterprises might want this data, even though there's not that much to it, right?
With this being known, the fact that it was just open and public and anyone could get in and see that information, why is our government accusing them of handing it off when they wouldn't even have to hand it off? It was just there all along.
I totally agree.
That accusation suddenly seems fake.
Right, and it does bump me a little bit because it's so naive to think that they would even have to cooperate. Like, their concern should just be, hey, you're capturing this imagery in a way that could easily leak to the public or to other governments, and please don't capture that sort of thing, whether it's pictures with your smartphone or pictures that you're loading in through Lightroom onto your computer and putting into Adobe Creative Cloud. Like, you just don't want to make that stuff public. If it's confidential, don't put it on the internet.
Yeah.
That's a very basic guideline, and something that definitely applies to DJI and any other type of device. And it's not just military people, but it's private businesses too. Couldn't
the same thing happen with your phone? I mean, if somebody is in a private area, they could use their phone to just take a video of themselves or a friend, not realizing that they're capturing top secret information. You have
stuff in the background, right?
You have GPS on your phone. I take pictures and it actually shows me on a map where the picture was taken. I mean, that information could be hacked just as easily.
Yeah, if you want to know what the new tech company in Silicon Valley is doing, you had access to that stuff, you could search by GPS coordinates and just find every selfie somebody took that happened in Silicon Valley, right?
Oh, the show, that's right.
Yeah, the show Silicon Valley. There was an interesting example cited as almost like evidence that DJI was spying on private industry. There was a winemaker in California who was having great success, like his crops were doing great. And he was using these DJI commercial drones with specialized cameras that can see like infrared and stuff and can kind of check the success of the foliage by using these non-visible spectrum light. It's really cool.
Whoa.
And he was using this to monitor his crops, and they were doing great, like way better than surrounding areas. And then suddenly, a Chinese company comes in and buys up surrounding lands and plants their own vineyards. Sounds suspicious, right? It almost sounds like they had access. Well, one explanation would be that they had access to that person's private drone captured data and used it to assess a good location for vineyards. Another is that it's purely coincidental.
I'm uncomfortable with both of those.
But because people can be a little bit paranoid, it becomes like an accusation, even though there's not nearly enough evidence to say that there was any connection. It could just be a coincidence.
Well,
but that's an example that I saw cited, and it's not fair.
Yeah, but there's not enough information. I mean, are people from China often buying land in that area? Is that a common industry to go into for those people? Like, come on, we need more facts here.
Yeah, but it is that kind of example that gets cited in conspiracies all the time.
It sounds like a conspiracy.
That's pretty much
it sounds a little foolish.
Okay, so would China steal people's private data, or do they have a code of ethics that would prevent them from doing that?
No government has a code of ethics. Are you kidding me?
Well, if you were really doing it in order to prepare for military conflicts where it might result in saving your citizens' lives,
yeah,
then the needs of the many kind of thing. But there is a long history of
these comments on this video are going to be fire. I can't wait to read them.
Oh, especially from the security nerds out there. I know they're going to be enraged about different things. But there's a long history of Chinese cyber warfare against both governments and private companies. And pulling headlines here, like here's an Ars Technica article. Chinese government is behind a decade of hacks on software companies. And you can go read it all. It seems real credible. The people who researched it seem
it's
like
the
they know what they're
invisible
doing.
war. It's very interesting to me that other generations and even my generation, they don't quite understand the invisible war constantly going on and how damaging these hacks can be, and the spread of misinformation and the manipulation of citizens. It's like we're in a whole new era.
Most of the time, if you get hacked, you don't know it.
Yeah.
And when companies do get hacked and they find out, usually they cover it up because it's real embarrassing. It's real rare that some company gets hacked and just announces it. It does happen.
Yeah.
But most of the time, they just try to keep it quiet to the point where they might even pay hackers like hundreds of thousands of dollars to not leak that they got hacked. Foreign Policy magazine puts the size of China's hacker army at anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 individuals. And again, I can't validate that, but there you have it. I think
How about
if they say it's 50,000 to 100,000, it's probably not zero. They probably have some hacker army, right?
I don't think it's one. I'm going to say over one.
Here's a map of Chinese cyber attacks against the U.S. according to the U.S. government. And you can see that there are little red dots marked all over the continental United States, each dot representing an attack against corporate, private, or U.S. government victims from what they believe to be the Chinese government. It's also really hard to separate.
But it's not fair. We have to show a chart of how many times we've cyber attacked them. Do we have that data?
I do not have that data.
Okay. I don't want this to become some political, like, anti-China thing, because like every government is doing this to every government. It's just kind of supporting, if it's possible, DJI could be having that information used for nefarious reasons.
Yeah, and I do want to make that point. Like the Russian government has lots of hackers. North Korea, despite having lousy internet, they actually have a pretty good cyber warfare. And the US government does amazing things. And if you want to be blown away, Google Stuxnet, Stuxnet, where allegedly the US government made malware, dropped it onto a USB drive, and then planted some USB drives in the parking lot of the center where Iran was doing development on nuclear armaments. And at some point, it was a totally offline network, not connected to the internet, which is why they had to physically drop some flash drives.
So some guy was like, dope, a Mickey Mouse USB.
Yep. And then he puts it right into his computer and it makes some malware. But that malware spread across their network, and it had specialized code specifically for like the centrifuges that they would use to refine uranium or whatever.
That's what I was referencing. They kept them from enriching the uranium, which you say it's a great thing, but I have to just get political for a moment. A lot of people think that that's super messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that seems like that successfully destroyed a lot of their equipment and set their effort back by years. And how do we know about that? Is that because the US government proclaimed it? No, it's because at some point, somebody on that network connected to the internet and their malware spread from the private network where it was supposed to be contained onto the public internet. And then a virus company stumbled across it in the wild and looked at the code and was like,
this is government code.
This is, yeah. And you can tell it's government code because it's the good stuff. You know what I mean?
They're like, yeah, it's that government stuff.
Yeah, right? It's just higher quality stuff than private hackers would generally make. So the U.S. government is doing this too. Maybe they managed to keep it on the down low a little bit better than
I don't think so. You just said it just spread all over the web. Everybody was like, what the heck?
An official statement from China: the Chinese government always opposes and forbids any cyber crimes, including hacking, that undermine the security of computer networks. So I just wanted to officially get the Chinese word out there.
Okay.
We kind of talked about if businesses would steal data. And yeah, businesses would steal data if they can make a profit, right? Because businesses care about profit, and often they have no ethics. And as an example, this is a quote from Business Insider: Uber hacked into a competitor's computer system, stole data from rivals, and recorded the private conversations of competitors at a hotel, according to a letter made public Friday during a lawsuit with Waymo, a competitor. So it's called corporate espionage, and it happens all the time. So governments are stealing data from governments and private companies are stealing data from each other too.
People are greedy.
Yeah. So I guess my point is, it doesn't matter if DJI is colluding with China. China can get your data. The U.S. government can get your data.
It doesn't matter because
Private
anyone
companies
could
can
get
your
it.
data. Yeah, if you're running a vineyard, maybe your competitors will decide to look at your
Josh
data.
can get your data. Your kid, Sam, 9 years old, he's got your data. You're not safe.
If you haven't read the story of Edward Snowden, definitely look it up because the guy sacrificed a lot to try to make a point about data. You don't just have to, you can't just trust the person you're trusting your data with.
I trust it with you.
You can't trust me. If you trust your data with DJI, do you trust their security? I mean, you can't, obviously they can get hacked, but anybody can get hacked. If you don't want the Chinese government or other companies, competitors to see your data, you keep it offline. And that's about all you can do. So it almost doesn't matter whether DJI colluded with China, but I don't believe that to be the case. Looking at the way they've developed their app, it is not the way you would develop an app if you were trying to collect data.
So you have a few lessons here. If it's online, it's not safe.
Right.
Never pick up a thumb drive in a parking lot. Something many people can learn from. What else?
We're all completely unsafe and we should all be scared.
Everyone, stop being greedy. That's not a tip, just a little advice I'm putting out there.
Yeah, don't take pictures that you don't want the world to see, period. Unless you can manage to keep it completely offline and never connected to the internet, which means not using your smartphone, which is always connected.
You're going to turn me into one of those bomb shelter people if we keep doing episodes like this.
But you know what? A lot of people are concerned about privacy. I actually don't care that much. I don't care if anybody, the whole world can see every drone photo I've ever taken. I don't care. None of it is secret. If there was something secret, I wouldn't take a picture of it with my drone.
Yeah, but like it might not be of any consequence to you personally, but you compile all of the information from a bunch of Tony Northrups with inconsequential footage, and suddenly you're mapping things that are potentially dangerous for someone to have.
This is a good point.
You can't what's the saying? Like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like the technology's out. Now we have to safeguard and find ways to make it safe. I mean,
that won't be successful. I mean, security is always this cat and mouse game. We go back and forth between vulnerabilities and exploits and countermeasures, but we're not going to catch up. It's always easier to attack stuff than it is to build up a wall.
Man, why can't more hackers be into doing good stuff? Okay.
Thanks to our sponsor, Squarespace.
Sure. Hey, we have Squarespace, and we love it. We need to get one for you, Justin. It'd be like a party. If you want your own Squarespace, you can get a free trial, 14 days. You don't have to put in your credit card and then remember to cancel. It's just 14 days, then you're done. No credit card needed. Go to squarespace.com/Tony. If you want to buy that trial, you can get 10% off with the coupon code portfolio. Check it out. It's great. If you can drag and drop, you can make a Squarespace website. It's nice.
Thanks, Squarespace. And I'd love to hear people's thoughts. Are you comfortable taking pictures and putting them on the internet? Do you share data from your drones? Do you synchronize your flight logs? And
do you live in fear like me?
I'd love to hear people's stories of getting hacked too.
Yeah.
How did your stuff leak? And what were the consequences of it?
I'd like to hear that.
See you next Wednesday and every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday. Bye.